I died on my 35th birthday in a studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a broken heater, alone with $17 in my bank account. The irony wasn't lost on me, even as my vision blurred and my chest tightened with what I now know was a massive heart attack brought on by years of stress, malnutrition, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from working 3 jobs just to survive. My phone, a cracked Android I'd bought used 5 years ago, sat on the floor just out of reach, buzzing with a notification. Through the haze of dying, I could make out the preview of a text from my mother. Melissa's book won another award. You must be so proud of what your sacrifice made possible. That's what killed me, I think. Not the heart attack itself, but that message. That final, casual reminder that my entire life had been reduced to a footnote in my younger sister's success story. The sacrifice. The supportive older sister who gave up everything so the golden child could shine. I tried to laugh, but my lungs wouldn't cooperate. 20 years. I'd spent 20 years in a holding pattern of poverty and dead-end jobs because I'd dropped out of college at 19 to work full-time so Melissa could finish her undergraduate degree without loans, then her master's, then her PhD, then her postdoc. The family had promised, sworn on everything holy, that once she finished, once she was established, they'd help me go back to school. That was 16 years ago. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was that text message, and the last thought I had was a bitter, poisonous thing. I hope it was worth it. Then I opened my eyes and I was 19 years old again, sitting in the financial aid office at State University, across the desk from Mrs. Henderson with her kind eyes and her devastating news. "I'm so sorry, dear," she was saying, exactly as she'd said 17 years ago. No, not 17 years ago, right now, this moment I was living. "With your parents' income bracket, you don't qualify for enough aid to cover tuition and living expenses. You'd need to take out substantial loans or get a job," I heard myself say, the words automatic, playing out the script I'd lived before. But inside, my mind was screaming, I was back. I was 19 years old, wearing the cheap blazer I'd bought from Goodwill for this meeting, and I was back at the exact moment my life had derailed. The fork in the road, the decision that had doomed me. Mrs. Henderson was still talking, explaining loan interest rates and work-study options, but I couldn't hear her over the roar of blood in my ears. My hands, young, uncalloused, without the burn scars from my second job at the diner, were shaking. This was real. This was happening. I had lived an entire life. I had died broke and alone and unmourned, except as a cautionary tale, a martyr to my sister's ambition. And now I was back, with all of those memories intact, sitting in this office about to make the same choice that had destroyed me. What if I don't stay? The words came out before I could stop them. Mrs. Henderson blinked. "I'm sorry? What if I don't stay in school?" I leaned forward, my mind racing. What if I just leave? Is there any penalty? "Well, you'd forfeit your enrollment deposit," but she looked concerned now. "Are you all right, dear? I know this is stressful, but there are options." "I'm fine." I stood up, my legs steadier than they should have been. "Thank you for your time." I walked out of that office, out of the financial aid building, across the quad where students lounged in the autumn sunshine, through the stone gates of State University, and I didn't look back. My phone, a chunky flip phone, God, I'd forgotten those existed, rang before I made it to the parking lot. Mom. I stared at the caller ID, memories flooding back. In my first life, I'd answered this call. She'd been crying, explaining that Melissa had been accepted to her dream school, but the financial aid package wasn't enough, that they couldn't afford to send both of us to college, that someone had to make a sacrifice, and wouldn't I please understand? Melissa was so gifted, had so much potential, and I was so responsible, so mature. Surely I could take a gap year, work, help the family, and then we'd figure something out. The gap year had become 2 decades. I let it ring, then I turned the phone off, got in my beat-up Honda Civic, the same car I'd driven into the ground over the next 15 years, and started driving. I didn't know where I was going. That part of my old life was a blur of panic and desperation, but this time, with the clarity of hindsight and the bitter knowledge of where the right choice had led me, I knew what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to answer that call. I wasn't going to go home. I wasn't going to sacrifice myself on the altar of Melissa's potential. This time, I was choosing myself. The motel room I rented with the last of my savings, money I'd carefully hoarded from my summer job before I'd handed it all over to help with Melissa's textbooks in my old life, was dingy, but it had a lock on the door and no family members who could guilt me through it. I sat on the scratchy comforter and tried to think. What did I have? A high school diploma? A resume padded with service industry jobs? $432. A car on its last legs. And the memories of an entire life lived in poverty, watching from the sidelines as my sister became Dr. Melissa Chen, celebrated neuroscientist, best-selling author, TED Talk darling. What did I know? I knew that Melissa's groundbreaking research, the work that had made her famous, that had won her awards and tenure and eventually a position at Harvard, hadn't actually been entirely hers. I'd seen the early drafts back when I was still welcome at family dinners, back when she'd still pretended we were sisters, and not just patron and charity case. I'd read her notes, listened to her practice presentations, and I remembered thinking even then that some of her best ideas had come from conversations with her graduate advisor, Dr. Patricia Lin. I knew that Dr. Lin had died in a car accident in 2009, just before Melissa's big breakthrough. Convenient timing, everyone had said sadly. If only Patricia could have seen Melissa's success. I knew that Melissa's first book, published in 2015, the one that launched her into mainstream fame, had leaned heavily on research data from a lab at MIT that had suffered a catastrophic server failure the year before. All their backup drives, corrupted. Years of research, gone. But Melissa had somehow managed to reference their unpublished findings with remarkable accuracy. I knew things about my sister that no one else knew, because I'd been there, invisible and unimportant, while she'd climbed her way to the top. And I knew something else. I knew what was coming. I remembered headlines, stock market crashes, viral trends, which startups would explode and which would implode. I had 17 years of future knowledge locked in my head. I didn't need a degree. I needed a strategy. The first step was brutal but necessary. I called home. Not Mom, she'd just try to guilt me into coming back, but Dad, who'd always been quieter, easier to manage. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with relief. "Your mother's been so worried. Where are you?" "I'm fine, Dad. Listen, I need you to tell them I'm taking some time to think. I'm not coming home right now." "But Melissa will be fine," I cut him off, harder than I'd ever spoken to him before. In my first life, I'd been so soft, so eager to please. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. The college fund you and Mom set up when we were kids, is it still there?" Silence. "Dad?" "Sweetheart, we had to use it. Your grandmother's medical bills, and then your uncle needed help with his business, and by the time Melissa was ready for college, there just wasn't—" "How much was mine?" "What?" "My half of the fund, how much was it? Originally?" Another pause. "About 35,000. But that was years ago, and you spent it." I kept my voice level, even though I wanted to scream. "You spent my college fund on other people, on Uncle Tom's business that failed in 6 months, on Grandma's bills that insurance should have covered, and now you're asking me to drop out and work to pay for Melissa's education because you spent the money that was supposed to be for me. It's not like that. We're a family. We all pitch in when—" "I want you to listen very carefully, Dad." My hand was cramping around the phone. "I'm not coming home. I'm not dropping out to pay for Melissa. She can get loans like everyone else, and if you ever tell anyone, and I mean anyone, that I'm being selfish or letting the family down, I will tell everyone exactly what happened to my college fund. I will tell them how you and Mom spent $35,000 that was supposed to be mine and then asked me to sacrifice 4 years of my life and go into debt to make up for your bad choices." "Sweetheart, I'm not your sweetheart anymore. I'm not your anything. Goodbye, Dad." I hung up, turned off the phone again, and threw up in the motel bathroom for 10 minutes. But I'd done it. I'd drawn the line. And unlike my first life, where I'd been too young and too conditioned to say no, this time I had the armor of hindsight and bitterness. This time I knew exactly how little they'd appreciated my sacrifice. I knew how they'd slowly stopped inviting me to holidays because I was an embarrassment. I knew how Melissa would write in her acknowledgments years later, thanking my parents for their unwavering support without once mentioning my name. So, fuck them. I had $400 and a head full of winning lottery numbers. Actually, I didn't. That was the frustrating thing. I'd never paid much attention to lottery numbers in my first life, too busy working myself to death. But I did remember other things. I remembered that in 2006, a little company called Tesla would have its initial internal discussions. I remembered that Bitcoin would emerge in 2009, worthless at first, a joke among tech enthusiasts. I remembered that Apple would release the iPhone in 2007, revolutionizing everything. I remembered which movies would be massive hits, which scandals would break, which celebrities would implode. I remembered that in 2008, the housing market would collapse and the economy would crater. And I remembered that the people who saw it coming, who bet against the market, who positioned themselves correctly, made fortunes. I just needed to survive until then. The problem was immediate. I was 19, with no degree, no connections, and very little money. In my first life, I'd worked retail, food service, eventually scraping my way into an administrative assistant position at a medical office where I'd stayed for 12 years, watching younger, more educated people get promoted around me. This time, I needed to be smarter. I spent 3 days in that motel room, barely eating, making lists and plans. I needed money, fast. I needed skills that would pay well without requiring a degree. And I needed to position myself somewhere, somehow, where I could capitalize on what I knew was coming. The answer came to me at 2 a.m, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Real estate. In my first life, I'd watched the housing bubble inflate with a mixture of envy and despair. I'd seen friends, people my own age with college degrees and real jobs, buying houses they couldn't afford, riding the wave of easy credit and rising property values. And then I'd watched it all come crashing down in 2008, destroying lives and fortunes. But I also remembered the people who'd survived, the ones who'd gotten out before the crash or who'd positioned themselves to buy cheap in the aftermath. Real estate agents who'd pivoted from selling overpriced McMansions to helping banks process foreclosures. Flippers who'd bought crashed properties for pennies on the dollar and held them until the recovery. You didn't need a college degree to get a real estate license. You just needed to pass a test. I used the motel's ancient computer, 25 cents for 15 minutes of internet, to research real estate schools. There was one in the city, a 60-hour course that would prepare me for the licensing exam. It cost $600. I had $400. So I got a job, not at a diner or a retail store, but at a call center, the kind of place that was always hiring because the work was soul-crushing and the turnover was astronomical. Cold calling people during dinner to sell them credit card insurance. It was miserable, but it paid $12 an hour, decent for 2005, and they didn't care about my lack of college experience. I worked 8-hour shifts, sometimes more, and every spare moment I wasn't working, I was studying. Not just for the real estate exam, though I devoured those materials, but learning everything I could about the housing market. I read economics blogs, housing market reports, anything I could access at the public library, and I saved. Every dollar that didn't go to my motel room or the cheapest food I could survive on went into a coffee can under the bathroom sink. My mother called 73 times in those first 2 months. I never answered. She left voicemails that progressed from worried to angry to guilt-tripping to eventually just resigned. Melissa called twice, both times leaving curt messages telling me I was being immature and hurting the family. I deleted them all. In early December, I scraped together enough for the real estate course. I signed up, attended every class, and absorbed the information like a sponge. It helped that I'd done this before, not the coursework, but the general experience of learning something new while exhausted and stressed. I'd spent 20 years pushing through fatigue, and this time I had the advantage of knowing it would pay off. I passed the licensing exam on my first try in January 2006. Now came the hard part. Actually breaking into real estate. Real estate I'd learned in my first life from watching HGTV during sleepless nights in my studio apartment was all about connections. It was about who you knew, what neighborhood you specialized in, how well you could network. Successful agents came from families in the business, or they had college degrees and social polish, or they had wealthy friends who became their first clients. I had none of that. What I did have was a willingness to work every open house in the city, a comfort with rejection from my months of cold calling, and the knowledge that the market was about to go absolutely insane. Applied to every real estate brokerage in a 50-mile radius. Most ignored me. A few interviewed me and passed. But finally, a small agency, Rogers and Associates, run by a tired-looking man named Bill Rogers, who was about 5 years from retirement, took a chance. "I'll be honest," he told me, looking over my bare-bones resume. "You don't have the background I usually look for. No college, no sales experience except telemarketing. But you passed the exam on your first try, and you're willing to work weekends. I'll give you a desk and a phone. The rest is up to you." The desk was in a corner of a cramped office that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. The phone was a landline that I'd have to share with 2 other junior agents. The commission split was 70-30, with the agency taking the 70. I didn't care. I was in. For the next 6 months, I lived and breathed real estate. I worked every open house I could find, even for other agents, just to meet potential clients. I door-knocked in neighborhoods where properties were about to list. I called expired listings and for sale by owner ads. I smiled until my face hurt, and I pitched myself as the hungry young agent who would work harder than anyone else. And slowly, painfully, I started to get clients. My first sale was in March 2006, a small starter home for a young couple who'd been pre-approved for way more than they should have been. In my first life, I would have been happy for them, would have thought it was wonderful that they were achieving the American dream. Now, with the knowledge of what was coming, I felt like I was selling them a ticking time bomb. But I needed the commission, and they were going to buy regardless. So I smiled, and I processed the paperwork, and I collected my $2,147 check, 30% of a 3% commission on a $178,000 house, and felt like I'd won the lottery. I saved every penny I could, living on ramen and ambition. My motel room became an apartment. Still small, still dingy, but mine. I bought a cheap laptop and spent my evenings researching, planning, preparing. By the end of 2006, I'd closed 15 deals. Small ones mostly, but they added up. After taxes and expenses, I had about $30,000 in the bank, and I knew exactly what to do with it. The stock market in 2006 was still riding high. Housing prices were climbing month over month. Everyone was convinced the good times would never end. Credit was loose, banks were giving mortgages to anyone with a pulse, and the phrase subprime lending was something only economics wonks cared about. But I knew what was coming. I'd lived through the crash, watched the economy implode, seen the ripple effects destroy lives. The question was, how could I profit from it? In my first life, I'd read articles about the investors who'd shorted the housing market, who'd essentially bet against it, buying financial instruments that would pay out when mortgages defaulted and housing prices collapsed. They'd been called crazy, irresponsible, unpatriotic. And then they'd made billions while everyone else lost everything. The problem was I didn't understand the complex financial instruments involved. Credit default swaps, synthetic CDOs. I'd read about them, but I had no idea how to actually trade them. And even if I did, you needed serious capital and connections to access those markets. What I could do was prepare for the aftermath. I kept working in real estate through 2007, even as I started to notice the signs that everyone else was missing. Inventory was increasing. Days on market were extending. The clients I was seeing were stretched thinner and thinner, with increasingly creative mortgage products to help them afford overpriced houses. In June 2007, I listed my first property that didn't sell. The sellers, a flipper couple who'd been riding the wave, kept lowering the price, getting more desperate. We finally closed in September at a $15,000 loss from their purchase price 2 years earlier. "It's just a blip," everyone said. The market's correcting. It'll bounce back. I knew better. In October 2007, I stopped selling. I told Bill Rogers I was taking a break, maybe going back to school. He was disappointed, but understood. I'd been a decent producer for him, and the market was getting weird anyway. What I actually did was wait. I lived off my savings, kept my expenses minimal, and watched the market like a hawk. In November, a major lender went bankrupt. In December, foreclosures started to tick up. By January 2008, the cracks were becoming fissures, and in March 2008, Bear Stearns collapsed. That was when I made my move. I'd spent months identifying targets. Neighborhoods that had been overdeveloped, streets where half the houses had been bought with subprime mortgages, properties that would flood the market when the default started. I researched tax records, mortgage data, anything public I could access. And then I waited for the foreclosures. They came like a wave. By summer 2008, the banks were so overwhelmed they were practically giving houses away. Properties that had sold for $300,000 in 2006 were going for $150,000, then $120,000, then less. I started buying in September, not to live in. I was still in my dingy apartment, saving every penny, but as investments. I bought foreclosed properties at auction, cash only, the kind that needed work, houses that other buyers were too scared or too broke to touch. My first purchase was a 3-bedroom ranch that had sold for $245,000 in 2006. I bought it for $67,000, cash. It needed new carpet, paint, some minor repairs. I did the work myself, YouTube tutorials and elbow grease, and listed it as a rental for $1,200 a month. It rented in 2 weeks. I bought another and another. By the end of 2008, I owned 5 rental properties, all cash purchases, all producing income. The market was still falling, wouldn't bottom out until 2011, but I didn't care. I wasn't trying to flip them. I was building a portfolio. And then, in November 2008, I diversified. Bitcoin wouldn't launch until January 2009, but I could prepare. I spent November researching cryptocurrency, understanding the technology, setting up the digital infrastructure I'd need. And then, in early 2009, when Bitcoin launched and each coin was essentially worthless, fractions of a penny, I bought 50,000 of them for less than $500. Everyone thought I was insane. The few people who even knew about Bitcoin treated it like a joke, monopoly money for tech nerds. I knew that by 2017, each Bitcoin would be worth over $19,000. But that was still 8 years away, and I couldn't just wait around. I kept working, kept buying properties as the market bottomed out, kept building my rental portfolio. By 2010, I owned 14 properties, all producing income, all appreciating slowly as the market began its recovery. I was 24 years old, and I was a millionaire on paper. And I hadn't spoken to my family in 5 years. The first time I heard about Melissa again was in 2011. I was at a coffee shop taking a rare moment to relax when I overheard 2 women at the next table. "Did you hear? Dr. Chen is speaking at the university next week. The neuroscientist, she's brilliant." My hand froze halfway to my coffee cup. Oh, I read her paper on neural plasticity. Fascinating stuff. She's only 30, already being talked about for major awards. I pulled out my phone, an iPhone now. I'd bought myself one of the first models in 2007 and searched for my sister's name. Dr. Melissa Chen, PhD, Neuroscience 2009, currently a postdoctoral researcher at Johns Hopkins, author of 17 published papers, 3 of them in Nature and Science, rising star in her field. She'd done it. She'd achieved everything the family had sacrificed me for. I looked at her faculty photo, polished, professional, smiling confidently at the camera, and felt absolutely nothing. No, that wasn't true. I felt vindicated. Because while she'd been grinding through graduate school and her postdoc, living on a $32,000 stipend, and drowning in the academic pressure cooker, I'd been building an empire. I searched for my parents next. Still in the same house based on public records. Dad was retired now. Mom was working part-time at a library. Solidly middle class, comfortable, but not wealthy. They'd bet everything on Melissa being their meal ticket, their retirement plan, the investment that would pay off. I wondered if it had. I closed the search and went back to work. I had a property closing that afternoon. By 2013, I'd made my first truly big move. Bitcoin had climbed to over $200 a coin, and I sold 10,000 of my coins for $2.1 million. I kept the remaining 40,000, knowing they'd go much higher. With that $2.1 million, I started a property management company, Chen Properties LLC, not because I particularly wanted to share a name with my family, but because it was my name too, and I'd earned it. I hired staff. I expanded beyond residential rentals into small commercial properties. I bought a mixed-use building downtown, renovated it, and turned the ground floor into hip retail spaces while keeping the upper floors as high-end apartments. I was 27 years old, and I was running a multi-million-dollar real estate business. And I still didn't have a college degree. That fact amused me more than it probably should have. All those years, everyone had insisted that I needed a degree to succeed, that without one, I'd be stuck in dead-end jobs forever. My mother had cried about how I was ruining my potential. My sister had called me short-sighted. And here I was, successful beyond any of their dreams, and I'd done it without spending a single day in a college classroom. In 2015, Melissa published her first book, Rewiring the Mind, the New Science of Neuroplasticity. It was aimed at a general audience, translating complex neuroscience into accessible prose. It got solid reviews and decent sales. I bought a copy more out of curiosity than anything else. I read it in one sitting, and I had to admit it was good. Well-written, engaging, full of fascinating research. But I also noticed something interesting. The acknowledgement section thanked my parents for their unwavering support, my mentors and colleagues, and everyone who believed in me. No mention of an older sister, no recognition of sacrifice. It was as if I'd never existed. I wondered if they even thought about me anymore. If I was just an embarrassing family secret, the daughter who'd gone off the rails, who'd thrown away her opportunities. Or maybe I was a cautionary tale. Remember your cousin Claire? She dropped out of college and we never heard from her again. That's why education is so important. It didn't matter. I'd built a life they couldn't even imagine, and I'd done it entirely without them. In 2016, I made my next major move. Bitcoin had climbed to $900 a coin, and I sold another 10,000 for $9 million. With that capital, I started a venture fund, Chen Capital, focused on real estate technology startups. I invested in a company developing AI for property valuation, another one creating virtual reality tools for real estate tours, a third building a platform to streamline rental management. Some of them would fail, but I knew which ones would succeed because I'd watched the tech landscape evolve in my first life. I knew which innovations would stick and which were flash-in-the-pan gimmicks. By the end of 2016, Chen Capital had $15 million in assets under management. I was 30 years old and I was worth approximately $45 million. I'd long since moved out of my dingy apartment. I lived in a penthouse I'd bought and renovated myself, 4,000 square feet of exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and custom everything. I drove a Tesla, I wore designer clothes, I employed 23 people across my various businesses, and I'd done it all myself, without a single family connection or college credential. That December, I was featured in a real estate industry magazine. Young Mogul, How Claire Chen Built a Real Estate Empire Before 30. The article was flattering, focused on my unconventional path and self-made success. They called me visionary, innovative, a disruptor. They had no idea how true that was. The article must have gotten some traction because 2 weeks later, I got an email to my business address. Claire, it's Mom. I saw the article about you. We're so proud. Please call me. I stared at that email for a long time. 6 years. 6 years of silence. And now they were proud. I didn't respond. 3 days later, another email, this time from Melissa. Claire, we need to talk. What you're doing to Mom and Dad is cruel. They've been trying to reach you for years. I don't know what your problem is, but you need to grow up and remember that family is important. Call me. I laughed out loud, there in my gorgeous penthouse with its view of the city, thinking about my sister lecturing me about family while she'd spent the last decade accepting their worship and my erasure without a single word of acknowledgement. I didn't respond to her either. In 2017, Bitcoin exploded. By December, it hit $19,083 per coin. I sold another 15,000 coins, saving the last 5,000 for true emergencies for $296 million. $296 million. I was 31 years old and I was worth over $300 million. I restructured my businesses, consolidated my holdings, and started thinking bigger. Chen Enterprises became my umbrella corporation, with Chen Properties, Chen Capital, and a new arm, Chen Technologies, focusing on prop tech investments. I bought a second building downtown and converted it into my headquarters. I hired a CFO, a COO, and a full executive team. I started getting invited to speak at real estate conferences, to sit on panels about innovation and disruption. Forbes ran a profile: The Woman Who Beat the Market, Claire Chen's Unconventional Rise. Fortune followed with No Degree, No Problem, How One Real Estate Mogul Rewrote the Rules. The articles always mentioned that I didn't have a college degree, treating it like a quirky footnote or an obstacle I'd overcome. They didn't understand that it wasn't despite my lack of degree, it was because I'd never gotten one. Because I'd spent those years working, learning, building, instead of sitting in lecture halls studying theories I'd never use. Because I'd chosen myself instead of sacrificing for someone else's dream. In early 2018, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Claire Chen, a woman's voice, professional. Speaking? Ms. Chen, my name is Dr. Patricia Wilson. I'm the chair of the business department at Northeastern University. I know this is unusual, but I wanted to reach out to you directly about a position we're looking to fill. I'm not interested in speaking engagements right now, I said, ready to end the call. I got these requests constantly. No, not a speaking engagement, a faculty position. We're creating a new program in entrepreneurial real estate, and we'd like you to consider joining us as a professor of practice. I actually laughed. Dr. Wilson, I don't have a college degree. I can't be a professor. For a traditional tenure-track position, no. But a professor of practice is different. It's for industry professionals who bring real-world expertise. Your lack of formal education actually makes you more interesting for this role, not less. You'd be teaching students that success can come from multiple paths. I thought about that. The irony of being offered a professor position when I'd never even graduated college. The symmetry of being able to teach while my sister, Dr. Melissa Chen, with all her credentials, was still grinding away in academia. I'll think about it, I told Dr. Wilson. I didn't take the job. I was too busy building my empire. But it stayed with me, that offer. The recognition that I'd succeeded so thoroughly that even academia, that bastion of credentials and formal education, was willing to bend its rules for me. In 2019, Melissa's career hit a new high. She was recruited to Harvard, offered an associate professorship with tenure track. It was a big deal. Harvard didn't hire early career faculty often, and certainly not with a direct path to tenure. She was 33 years old, and she'd made it to the top of her field. The family was ecstatic, based on the Facebook posts I'd found by searching. Mom posted constantly about our daughter, the Harvard professor. Dad shared every article that mentioned her. I wondered if they ever thought about their other daughter, the one who'd been erased from the family story. I didn't care enough to ask. My businesses continued to grow. By 2020, Chen Enterprises was valued at over $800 million. I'd diversified into other industries, a little bit of biotech here, some clean energy there, always following the threads of knowledge I'd retained from my first life. And then COVID hit, the pandemic that I'd somehow forgotten about in all my planning. I'd been so focused on the financial crisis, on Bitcoin, on the major economic shifts, that I'd completely overlooked the virus that would shut down the world. But I adapted quickly. I'd lived through this before, after all. I knew which businesses would survive and which would thrive. I knew that real estate would take a hit but recover quickly. I knew that certain types of tech companies would explode. I pivoted my portfolio, made strategic investments, and when the dust settled, Chen Enterprises was valued at $1.2 billion. I was 34 years old and I was a billionaire. The same age I'd been when I died alone in that studio apartment in my first life. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. In late 2020, I got another email from Melissa. Claire, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I'm getting married next spring. I'd like you to be there. I know we haven't talked in years, and I know you're angry about something, but you're still my sister. Mom and Dad miss you. I miss you. Please think about coming. I read that email 3 times, looking for the apology that wasn't there. Looking for any acknowledgement of what had happened, any recognition of how I'd been treated. There was nothing. Just the assumption that I'd show up and smile and play happy family, as if the last 15 years hadn't happened, as if I hadn't sacrificed my entire future for her dreams, as if I hadn't been erased from the family story the moment I stopped being useful. I deleted the email. In 2021, something interesting happened. Chen Enterprises had grown large enough that I needed to expand my executive team, particularly on the prop tech side. I was looking for a COO for Chen Technologies, someone with both scientific credentials and business acumen. My head of HR sent me a stack of resumes for the position. I was flipping through them, barely paying attention. I trusted her judgment when I froze. Dr. Melissa Chen, PhD, currently Associate Professor of Neuroscience at Harvard University, seeking opportunities in industry, particularly at the intersection of neuroscience and technology. My sister had applied to work for me. I read her resume 3 times, unable to quite believe it. She'd listed her impressive academic credentials, her publications, her awards. And then, at the bottom, a note. Interested in transitioning from academia to industry, particularly interested in applications of neuroscience to artificial intelligence and human-computer interaction. She had no idea. She'd applied to Chen Enterprises, a company she must have heard of given its gaze and media presence, without realizing that it was my company, that Claire Chen, CEO, was her estranged sister. Or maybe she did know, and this was her way of reaching out. Either way, it was perfect. I called my head of HR. "This one," I said, tapping Melissa's resume. "Bring her in for an interview." "Are you sure? Her background is pure academic research. No industry experience, no business training." "I'm sure. I want to meet her." The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon in February. I prepared for it like I was preparing for battle, which, in a way, I was. I dressed carefully, a custom suit, simple but obviously expensive, hair and makeup perfect, every inch the successful CEO. I reviewed her resume again, her publications, everything she'd done in the years since I'd last seen her. She'd accomplished a lot. Really, I had to give her credit. She'd made the most of the opportunity my sacrifice had bought her. Now she wanted to cash in that academic success for an industry payday, and she'd come knocking on my door to do it. At 2 p.m., my assistant buzzed. "Dr. Chen is here for her interview." "Send her in." The door opened and Melissa walked into my office. She'd aged well, 35 looked good on her. Professional clothing, confident bearing, the air of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. She smiled, extending her hand. "Ms. Chen, thank you so much for taking the time to—" She froze. Her hand dropped. I smiled back at her, making no move to stand or shake her hand. "Hello, Melissa." "Claire?" Her voice cracked on my name. This is your company?" "It is." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. "Please sit down. You're here for an interview, aren't you?" She stood there for a long moment, frozen, before mechanically moving to the chair across from my desk. She sat down slowly, like she was afraid it might disappear. "I didn't," she started. "I had no idea." "That Chen Enterprises was mine? Really? You didn't look into the company before applying?" "I did, but I thought the articles always just said Claire Chen, and that's not an uncommon name." "I never imagined—" She stopped, staring at me. "What are you doing here? How are you? This is a billion-dollar company." 1.2 billion, actually, as of our last valuation. "But you didn't even go to college. You dropped out. You worked in retail or something. I don't understand." There it was. The fundamental disconnect. In her mind, I was still the sacrifice, the footnote, the sister who'd failed to launch. She couldn't comprehend that I'd not only launched but soared past her. "I didn't drop out," I said calmly. I chose not to enroll. There's a difference. And I didn't work in retail. I worked in real estate. Built a portfolio, made some good investments, expanded into other industries. The usual entrepreneurial path. "But," she was floundering, trying to process. "Mom and Dad said you'd disappeared, that you'd cut off contact. We thought you were— I don't know what we thought. That you were struggling, that you'd made bad choices. And you never once tried to find out, to check if I was okay?" I kept my voice neutral, conversational. "In 15 years, you never thought to do more than send a couple of emails?" She flushed. "You never responded." And you'd made it clear you didn't want anything to do with us. You assumed I'd failed, that I was living some sad, small life somewhere, and that reaching out would just be embarrassing for everyone. Better to pretend I didn't exist. That's not fair, isn't it? I picked up her resume. Let's talk about why you're here. You're looking to leave academia. Why? She blinked at the change of subject, clearly still reeling. The academic job market is tough. Even with tenure, the salary is limited. And I'm interested in applied research, in seeing my work have real-world impact. Industry offers opportunities that academia doesn't. Translation: she'd maxed out her earning potential as a professor and wanted to cash in. Academic salaries topped out around $200,000 for full professors at top universities. Industry could offer double or triple that, plus stock options. And you're interested in Chen Technologies specifically because your company's at the forefront of prop tech innovation. I've been following your work with AI and predictive analytics. I think my background in neuroscience and cognitive science could bring a unique perspective to human-computer interaction in real estate applications. It was a good pitch. She'd clearly done her homework on the company, even if she hadn't realized who owned it. Walk me through your research experience, I said. What are your major contributions to your field? She relaxed slightly on familiar ground. She talked about her work on neuroplasticity, on how the brain rewires itself in response to experience, about her studies on learning and memory, on cognitive enhancement, on the applications to education and rehabilitation. She was smart. I'd always known that. Her research was genuinely impressive, her understanding deep and nuanced. She'd earned her position at Harvard, her publications, her reputation. She'd just done it at my expense. Interesting, I said when she finished. And you think this translates to technology? How? She launched into a detailed explanation of how understanding neural patterns could improve AI design, how cognitive science principles could create more intuitive user interfaces, how memory research could inform data architecture. I let her talk, watching her come alive as she discussed her work. This was what she was good at, what she'd spent 15 years building expertise in, while I'd been building a business empire. I have to admit, she said, winding down, this is surreal. I still can't believe you're... She gestured around the office. All of this. Why, because I don't have a PhD? No, that's not... She stopped. Okay, yes, partly. You have to understand, Claire, in our family, education was everything. You were supposed to go to college, get a degree, build a career that way. When you left, we all thought that I was throwing my life away. Yes. And did you ever question that narrative? I asked quietly. Did you ever think about why I left? About what was happening before I walked away? She shifted uncomfortably. Mom said you'd had some kind of breakdown, that the pressure of college was too much. I laughed, bitter and sharp. Is that what she told you? What else was it supposed to be? Melissa, do you remember the college fund Mom and Dad set up for us? Of course, they used it for my education. I was lucky. I graduated without loans because of it. It was supposed to be for both of us, I said. $35,000 each. They spent my half before I even graduated high school. And then, when you got into college, they asked me to drop out and work to help pay us for your education, to make up for the money they'd spent that was supposed to be mine. She stared at me. They didn't. Call Dad and ask him. It's all true. They spent my college fund on other things, and then they asked me to sacrifice my education for yours. And I did, for about 5 minutes, until I realized what my life would look like if I said yes. So I said no, I left, and I built this. I gestured around the office. Without them, without you, without anyone. I didn't know, Shays, she whispered. Would it have mattered if you did? She didn't answer. Here's what I think happened, I continued. I think they told you some version of events that made me the problem. The flaky daughter who couldn't handle the pressure, who made bad choices, who burned her bridges. And you believed it because it was easier than questioning whether your entire education was built on someone else's sacrifice, whether your success came at my expense. Claire, and now you're here applying to work for me because your academic success isn't enough anymore. You want the money and the opportunities that industry offers. You want to cash in on all those years of research and credentials. I leaned forward. So, here's my question. Do you think you deserve this job? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I think my qualifications speak for themselves. Your qualifications are impressive, but I'm not asking about your qualifications. I'm asking if you think you deserve to work for me specifically. Your sister, whose life was supposed to be a footnote to your success, whose sacrifice you've never acknowledged, whose existence you've erased from your story. Do you think you deserve to benefit from my success after I got nothing from yours? I thanked the family in my acknowledgments, she said weakly. The family, not me specifically, never me. Because that would require acknowledging that your perfect success story has a dark side, that someone paid for your opportunity. She looked down at her hands. What do you want me to say? I want you to be honest. With me and with yourself. Why are you really here? A long silence. Then quietly. Because I saw that you'd made it. That you were successful, and I thought, maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe we could reconnect. Maybe you'd forgiven us. Forgiven you for what? For whatever we did that made you leave. You still don't get it. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city. You didn't do anything, Melissa. That's the problem. You accepted everything, the support, the sacrifices, the opportunities, without ever asking what they cost. You let our parents erase me from the family story because it was convenient. You built your career on a foundation that included my destroyed future, and you never once looked back. I'm sorry. Her voice was small. I didn't understand. I didn't know. And now that you do know, now that you're sitting in my office, applying for a job at my company, asking me for an opportunity, what are you going to do differently? She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. I don't know. What do you want me to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? In my first life, I'd wanted acknowledgement, an apology, some recognition that my sacrifice had mattered, that I'd mattered. I'd wanted the family to see me as more than just the supporting character in Melissa's story. I'd died without ever getting that. In this life, I'd built something so big, so undeniable that they couldn't ignore me anymore. I'd proven that I didn't need them, didn't need their approval or their support. I'd won. But winning felt emptier than I'd expected. I want you to tell the truth, I said finally. In your next book, in your next interview, in your next acknowledgement section, I want you to tell the truth about how you got where you are. About the sister who was asked to give up her education for yours. About how I said no and how the family treated me after. I want you to tell the truth about privilege and sacrifice and the cost of success. That would destroy my reputation, she whispered. Why? Because people would know you're not entirely self-made? That you had help, had advantages, had someone else pay part of your price? Welcome to reality, Melissa. Almost no one succeeds entirely on their own. The difference is whether you acknowledge it or pretend it didn't happen. And if I do this, if I tell the truth, will you hire me? I turned back to look at her. My sister, accomplished and credentialed and desperate, asking me for a job. The irony was almost too perfect. Here's what I'll do, I said. I'll give you a position. Not COO, you're not qualified for that despite your impressive resume. But I'll create a role for you as a research consultant. You'll work on human-computer interaction projects, advise our AI team, help us develop more intuitive interfaces. It's a 1-year contract, 60 hours a week, $180,000 salary. Her eyes widened. That was less than half what a COO would make, and probably close to what she was making as a Harvard professor. You want me to leave a tenured position at Harvard for a 1-year contract? I want you to prove you can succeed in industry, That you can adapt, learn new skills, work in a fast-paced environment where credentials matter less than results. If you do well, we'll talk about a permanent position. If not, you go back to academia. That's not a standard industry offer. No, it's not. It's a test. The same kind of test I've been passing for 15 years without anyone's help. So here's my question. Do you have what it takes to succeed on merit alone without the safety net of tenure and academic prestige? Or was all of that success built on a foundation you couldn't replicate on your own? She sat there, stunned, and I could see her, calculating. Could see her weighing the risk against the potential reward, the security of Harvard against the chance to prove herself in a new arena. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until Friday. Email me your decision. I moved back to my desk, picked up a file, effectively dismissing her. My assistant will show you out. She stood slowly, moving like she was in a dream. At the door, she turned back. Sorry. Claire, yes? I really am sorry, for whatever it's worth. We'll see, I said. Actions matter more than words. Show me you mean it. She left. I sat in my office for a long time after she was gone, staring out at the city I'd conquered. Was I being cruel? Probably. Was I enjoying it? Absolutely. But more than that, I was curious. I wanted to see if she'd take the offer, if she'd be willing to give up her security and prestige to prove herself in a new field, the way I'd had to give up everything to build myself from nothing. I wanted to see if she had what it took to succeed without the safety net. Friday came. At 4:47 p.m., an email arrived from Melissa. I accept your offer. When do I start? I smiled. Monday, I replied. 8 a.m., don't be late. The next few months were fascinating to watch. Melissa started at Chen Technologies on a Monday morning in March, and she immediately discovered that industry was nothing like academia. In academia, she'd been a star. Dr. Chen, the brilliant researcher, the published author, the Harvard professor, people had deferred to her expertise, respected her credentials, listened when she spoke. At Chen Technologies, she was just another employee, a consultant with an impressive resume but no industry experience, no track record, no proof she could deliver results in a business context. And she reported to James Wu, my VP of technology, who was 32 years old, had dropped out of MIT to start a company, and had exactly zero patience for academic credentials without practical skills. I watched from a distance, getting reports from James, occasionally checking in on projects she was involved in. The adjustment was rocky. She keeps trying to turn everything into a research project, James told me in our weekly meeting. I asked her to audit our user interface flow and suggest improvements. She came back with a 50-page literature review and a proposal for a 6-month study. I need actionable recommendations in 2 weeks, not a research agenda. Give her feedback, she'll learn. Are you sure? Because honestly, Claire, I don't understand why we hired her. Her background is impressive, but it's not relevant to what we do. We could have hired someone with actual industry experience. Consider it an experiment, I said. Sometimes the best innovations come from bringing in outside perspectives. He didn't look convinced, but he trusted me enough to keep working with her. Melissa, to her credit, tried. I saw her staying late, adapting her approach, learning, to translate her research expertise into business language. She was smart enough to recognize when she was out of her depth and humble enough now to ask for help. But it was hard. I could see it in the tight lines around her eyes when I occasionally passed her in the hallway, in the way she hunched over her computer, in the stress she radiated. Welcome to the real world, I thought. Welcome to working without a safety net. In May, we had our first major project review for the AI interface work Melissa had been consulting on. She'd been working with our development team to implement cognitive science principles into our property matching algorithm, trying to make it more intuitive and user-friendly. The presentation was in our main conference room with the entire executive team present. Melissa stood at the front presenting her findings, and I watched carefully. She'd learned. The presentation was concise, business-focused, with clear recommendations backed by data. She'd trimmed all the academic jargon, all the excessive citations, all the hedging that academics loved. She spoke with confidence, answered questions directly, and when she didn't know something, she admitted it instead of trying to bluff. The proposed changes should increase user engagement by approximately 15%, she concluded. We can implement them in the next sprint, test with a pilot group, and roll out gradually based on results. James, sitting next to me, nodded approvingly. Good work, Dr. Chen. This is exactly what we needed. After the meeting, I caught her in the hallway. Well done. She blinked, surprised. Thank you. I wasn't sure. This is all so different from what I'm used to. Different isn't bad. You're adapting. It's hard, she admitted. Harder than I thought it would be. I keep wanting to dive into research, to understand every variable, to control for every possible factor. But there's no time for that here. You have to make decisions with incomplete information and move fast. Welcome to business. Is this what it was like for you, starting out, building all of this? I thought about that, about the cold calling and the rejection, the sleepless nights and the constant stress, the years of grinding before I'd achieved any real success. Yes and no, I said. I had to learn everything from scratch, business, real estate, finance. But I didn't have the baggage of expecting things to work a certain way. I just did what needed to be done. I keep thinking about what you said, about how I accepted everything without asking what it cost. She looked down at her hands. You were right. I didn't want to look too closely at how I got here. It was easier to just focus on my work and assume everything else was fine. And now? Now I'm doing what you asked. I'm writing about it. An essay for The Atlantic about privilege in academia, about the unseen costs of success, about how my education was built partly on my sister's sacrifice. She met my eyes. It's going to cause problems. Colleagues are going to question my credibility. Students might see me differently, but you're right. The truth matters. When does it publish? Next month. I nodded. I'll look forward to reading it. The article published in June, and it caused exactly the kind of stir Melissa had predicted. The hidden cost of success, on privilege, family, and the sacrifices we don't acknowledge, laid out her story with unflinching honesty. She wrote about the college fund, about being asked to accept my sacrifice, about never questioning it until years later. She wrote about how academic success stories often had hidden costs, about how we celebrated individual achievement while ignoring the support systems that made it possible. And she wrote about me, not by name but clearly, about the sister who'd refused to be a sacrifice and had built her own path to success without credentials or family support. The academic community had a field day. Some praised her honesty and self-reflection. Others accused her of seeking attention or undermining her own achievements. Twitter, predictably, exploded with hot takes, but the essay also resonated widely. I saw it shared hundreds of thousands of times, discussed on podcasts, referenced in other articles. People responded to the honesty, to the acknowledgement that success was rarely as simple as the stories we told. My phone has been ringing off the hook, Melissa told me one afternoon. We'd started having occasional coffee meetings, carefully neutral ground where we could talk. Interview requests, speaking invitations, even a few book deals. People want to hear more about the honest conversation about privilege. Are you going to do it? Some of it. It feels important, but also, she hesitated. I don't want to make a career out of being the person who wrote one honest essay. I'd rather do the work here, prove I can succeed in a new field. How's that going? Better. James actually complimented me last week. I think I might be getting the hang of this. She was. By August, her one-year contract halfway done, Melissa had become a valuable member of the team. She'd learned to translate her research expertise into practical applications, to work at industry speed, to collaborate with people who didn't care about her credentials. And more importantly, she'd learned humility. I was insufferable in academia, she confessed over coffee one day. I thought my credentials made me special, that I was smarter than everyone else because I had a PhD from a good school. Coming here, having to prove myself all over again, it's been humbling. Good for me probably, but humbling. Everyone should have to prove themselves, I said. Credentials are a starting point, not an ending point. Is that why you never went back to school, even after you'd made it? I thought about the offers I'd gotten over the years, the invitations to get an honorary degree, to enroll in an executive MBA program, to legitimize my success with formal credentials. Partly on the Einstein higher partly, I said, but mostly because I didn't need to. I'd already proven that I could succeed without a degree. Going back would have felt like admitting that I'd been wrong, that credentials mattered more than results, and I didn't believe that. Do you ever regret it, not having that experience? The college experience? I shook my head. Not really. I learned what I needed to learn, and I did it in the real world where mistakes had actual consequences. That's worth more than any lecture hall. But the connections, the network, I built my own network, my own connections. And I did it without owing anyone anything or having to maintain relationships with people I met at age 18. I looked at her directly. Melissa, you're still thinking like credentials are the only path to success. They're not. They're one path. I took a different one. A harder one. Maybe. But it was mine. In October, Melissa's one-year contract was coming up for renewal. James had already told me he wanted to keep her on, possibly in a more permanent role. She's become one of our best consultants, he said, a son. The team loves working with her. Her recommendations have consistently improved our products, and she's learned to operate at industry speed. I'd like to offer her a 2-year contract with a significant raise, maybe even start transitioning her into a management role. What do you think she's worth? Given her contributions? I'd say $250,000 plus stock options. That was a substantial raise from her starting salary and more than she'd been making at Harvard. It was also a recognition of actual value delivered, not just credentials. Offer her 3 years, I said, and $300,000, plus a VP title, VP of Research Science. Let her build a team, develop a long-term research agenda that aligns with our business goals. James raised his eyebrows. That's generous. She's earned it, and more importantly, she's proven she can succeed here. Reward that. The offer was made. Melissa accepted. And for the first time in our adult lives, I felt like we were on even ground. Not because she was working for me, that was satisfying, but it wasn't the point. But because she'd finally experienced what I'd experienced, having to prove herself without a safety net, having to build something from scratch, having to face the possibility of failure. She'd grown from it, and maybe, finally, we could have something resembling a real relationship. In November, my mother called. Not emailed, called directly to my cell phone, which she shouldn't have had. Before you hang up, she said quickly when I answered, please just listen for a minute. I waited. Melissa told us everything. About the college fund, about what we asked you to do, about why you left. Her voice was thick with emotion. Claire, we didn't understand. We thought we were doing the right thing for the family. We thought you were just being difficult, that you'd come around eventually. We didn't realize that you'd destroyed your relationship with your daughter. Yes. And we're sorry. Your father and I were so sorry. We know it's too late. We know we can't undo it, but we wanted you to know that we understand now, that we were wrong. What do you want, Mom? Nothing. I wanted to apologize and to tell you that we're proud of you, of what you've built. Melissa showed us articles about your company, and we had no idea. You've done so much, accomplished so much, and we weren't there for any of it. We're sorry for that too. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it. The apology I'd wanted for so long finally given, and it felt like nothing. Too little, too late. I appreciate you calling, I said finally. But I don't know what you want me to do with this. I don't want anything. I just wanted you to know, and if you ever want to talk, to reconnect, we'd like that. But if not, we understand. We owe you that much. After she hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand, processing. They were sorry. They understood now. Melissa had told them the truth, and they'd finally seen what they'd done. And I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no sense of vindication. Just a vague sadness for what could have been, and a grateful relief for what was. I called Melissa. "Mom called me," I said when she answered. "I know, I told her to wait, but it's fine. I just wanted to thank you for telling them the truth. I know that wasn't easy. It was necessary. They needed to understand. And I needed to say it out loud to stop pretending the past didn't matter." She paused. "Are you going to forgive them?" "I don't know. Maybe eventually, but not yet. They apologized because they finally understood the consequences of their choices, not because they thought they were wrong at the time." "That's not the same thing as genuine remorse?" "Fair enough. For what it's worth, I think they do genuinely regret it. But you're right, they only understood after seeing what you became. If you'd stayed poor and struggling, they probably never would have questioned their choices." "Exactly. So what now?" "Now," I thought about it. "Now we keep moving forward. You keep building your career. I keep building my company. We figure out what kind of relationship we can have, if any." "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like to be your sister again. For real this time." "Then keep proving it. Not with words, but with actions." "I will." By 2023, Chen Enterprises had expanded into 8 countries and was valued at over $2 billion. I'd been named one of Forbes' most powerful women, invited to speak at Davos, and featured on the cover of Fast Company. And through it all, I'd never gotten a college degree. The media loved that angle. Every article mentioned it, usually in the first paragraph. Claire Chen, the billionaire entrepreneur without a college degree. As if my lack of formal education was the most interesting thing about me, rather than everything I'd built despite it. But I understood why it resonated. In a world that told everyone they needed a degree to succeed, I was proof that there were other paths, that credentials weren't destiny, that sometimes the best education came from taking risks, making mistakes, and learning in the real world. I'd given dozens of talks by this point, at conferences and universities and corporate events. And the question that always came up was, "Do you ever regret not getting your degree?" My answer evolved over time, but by 2023, I'd settled on this. No, because the path I took, the one without a degree, without formal education, without anyone's support, made me who I am. It taught me to be resourceful, to be independent, to trust my own judgment. If I'd gone to college, if I'd followed the traditional path, I wouldn't have built this company. I wouldn't have taken the risks I took. I would have been trained to think inside the box, and everything I've done has required thinking outside it. But don't you think education is valuable? Of course, but there are many kinds of education. Formal schooling is one kind, learning by doing is another, reading voraciously is another, finding mentors is another. The key is to never stop learning, never assume you know everything. Credentials can give you a head start, but they're not a substitute for curiosity and persistence. And then, inevitably, what about your sister? She has a PhD and now works for you. How does that feel? My sister is an incredibly talented researcher who decided to transition from academia to industry. She works for Chen Technologies because she's earned her place here through her contributions and her ability to apply her expertise in practical ways. Her degree got her in the door for an interview, but her results are what kept her here. That's true for everyone we hire. I never mentioned the backstory in public. That was between us. But privately, I'd sometimes think about the symmetry of it all, how in my first life I'd sacrificed for Melissa's education, and it had destroyed me. How in this life I'd refused to sacrifice, and it had saved me. How she'd climbed to the top of academia with credentials and prestige, and I'd climbed higher in business with nothing but determination and knowledge of what was coming. How she now worked for me, the sister she'd once pitied, and how we'd both had to learn humility in different ways. In December 2023, Chen Enterprises held its annual holiday party, a massive event for all our employees and their families. I usually gave a speech at these things, thanking everyone for their hard work and outlining our vision for the coming year. This time, I decided to tell a story. When I was 19, I began, standing on the small stage in front of 300 people, I was faced with a choice. I could stay in college and accumulate debt, or I could leave and help my family. I left, but not for the reasons everyone thought. I left because I realized that the traditional path, college, degree, career, wasn't the only path, and I decided to take a risk on myself. I saw Melissa in the crowd, watching intently. For years, people told me I was making a mistake, that without a degree, I'd never succeed, that I was throwing away my potential. And I won't lie, there were moments when I doubted myself, when the path I'd chosen seemed impossibly hard, and I wondered if they were right. But I kept going. I learned by doing. I made mistakes, and I learned from them. I took risks that terrified me, and slowly, piece by piece, I built something. Not because of credentials or connections, but because I refused to give up. Now, I'm not telling you this to say that college is worthless. It's not. Many of you have degrees and they've served you well, but I'm telling you this to say that there are many paths to success, that your worth isn't determined by where you went to school or what letters come after your name, that what matters is what you do with the opportunities you're given, however you find them. This company exists because I took a risk, because I believed in myself when no one else did. And my hope is that working here, you all feel empowered to take your own risks, to trust your own judgment, to build something that matters to you, whatever that looks like. So thank you. Thank you for being part of this journey, for taking risks with me, for believing in what we're building together. Here's to another year of proving that success comes in many forms. The applause was thunderous, but as I stepped down from the stage, I caught Melissa's eye. She was crying quietly, and she mouthed two words, "Thank you." I nodded. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. Understanding, the beginning maybe, of something new. Later that night, after the party wound down, Melissa and I found ourselves on the balcony of the venue, looking out at the city lights. "That speech," she said, "it was about more than just your business journey. Everything's about more than one thing. I've been thinking about what you said, about how I accepted everything without questioning what it cost. And you're right, I did. I was so focused on my own path that I never looked around to see who was paying for it. You were young. We both were. That's not an excuse. I should have known better. I should have questioned it. Maybe, but you know now, and you've been making different choices." She nodded. "I've been thinking about writing a book. Not about neuroscience, but about this, about what it really takes to succeed, the hidden costs and compromises, the people who help us, and the people who get left behind, about how we need to be honest about all of it, not just the triumphant parts. Will you tell our story?" "If you'll let me. The whole story, including how wrong I was, including how you succeeded despite everything." I thought about it, about seeing our story in print, public and permanent. "Yes," I said finally. Tell it all." "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts. That's where the truth is." We stood there in silence for a while. Two sisters who'd taken such different paths and ended up in such unexpected places. "I still can't believe you built all this without a degree," she said eventually. I laughed. "I still can't believe you gave up tenure at Harvard to work for me." "Best decision I ever made. Scarier than anything I did in academia, but better." "Why?" "Because for the first time, I'm succeeding on my own merit, not on credentials or reputation. Because I'm learning to take risks, to think differently. Because I'm finally understanding what you understood all along, that the traditional path isn't the only path, that sometimes the best thing you can do is create your own way forward. And what are you going to do with that understanding?" She smiled. "Build something new, just like you did." Looking back now from the vantage point of 2025, I can see how perfectly it all worked out. How the rebirth that gave me a second chance also gave me the knowledge I needed to build an empire. How refusing to sacrifice myself saved me in ways I couldn't have imagined. How my sister, who once represented everything I'd lost, became someone I could respect and even tentatively trust. Chen Enterprises is now worth $3.8 billion. I'm 39 years old and I've accomplished more than I ever dreamed possible in either lifetime. I've built a business that employs over 1,500 people that's changed how an entire industry operates. That's made me one of the most successful entrepreneurs of my generation. And I've done it all without a college degree. Melissa is now the VP of Research Science at Chen Technologies, leading a team of 20 researchers and developers. She's published 3 papers in industry journals, spoken at major tech conferences, and been instrumental in several of our biggest innovations. She's also written her book, The Hidden Price, Rethinking Success, Privilege, and What We Owe Each Other, which became a bestseller and sparked important conversations about how we talk about achievement. We have coffee every few weeks. We're not as close as sisters probably should be. There's still too much history, too much pain that can't be entirely erased. But we're building something, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation, based on who we are now rather than who we were supposed to be. My parents and I are speaking again, tentatively. Once a month, I call them, and we have careful conversations about nothing important. They're still uncomfortable with what happened, still struggling to reconcile their actions with their self-image, as good parents. But they're trying, and that's something. I've been thinking lately about what I want to do next. Chen Enterprises is established, successful, running smoothly. I have good people running day-to-day operations. I could step back, enjoy my success, focus on other things. I've been approached about starting a venture capital fund focused on founders without traditional credentials, people who, like me, are building something outside the usual paths. The idea appeals to me, helping others who are taking risks, who are building without a safety net, who are proving that there are many ways to succeed. Or maybe I'll write my own book, not a business memoir, the world doesn't need another one of those, but something about alternative paths to success, about how we've created a society that treats college as mandatory, that acts like a degree is the only valid credential, and how that's limiting and unfair and untrue, about how I built a billion-dollar company without ever setting foot in a college classroom, and what that means for how we think about education and success. About how the best revenge isn't just succeeding, it's succeeding so thoroughly that you rewrite the rules. I think about my first life sometimes, about the woman I was, dying alone in that studio apartment, having sacrificed everything for a family that never appreciated it, about how bitter and small that life was, how wasted. And then I look at my life now, at the empire I've built, the success I've achieved, the choices I've made, at how I took the same starting point and created something entirely different just by choosing myself instead of sacrificing for others, at how my sister, the one who benefited from my sacrifice in that first life, now works for me. Not because I demanded it or engineered it for revenge, but because she genuinely wanted to transition to industry, and my company was the best place for her to do it. The irony is perfect. The symmetry is satisfying. But more than that, the reality is better than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. Because I didn't just succeed. I didn't just build wealth or a company or a reputation. I built a life on my own terms. I proved that the traditional path, college, degree, career, isn't the only way. I showed that sometimes the best thing you can do is refuse to sacrifice yourself for someone else's dream and instead chase your own. And in doing so, I created something real, something lasting, something that will outlive me and continue to change how people think about success and education and what's possible. I never got a degree. My family made me drop out to support her PhD. After Rebirth, she works for me, and I couldn't be happier about how it all turned out because this time I chose myself, and that made all the difference.